I came home 3 days earlier than planned, expecting to surprise my daughter before Christmas. Instead, I found the house completely dark. Sweetheart. Where are you? I called, but only silence answered. Then I noticed faint scratching from the garage. Curled up on the freezing concrete was my 12-year-old daughter, clutching a crumpled piece of notebook paper. She whispered, "Dad, don't let Grandma know you found me." I unfolded the note with trembling hands, and after reading one sentence, I realized this wasn't punishment. Someone had been hiding a terrifying secret from me all along. I'm so grateful you're here with me today. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from. Your city, your country, I'd love to know. Welcome to Dad Family Revenge. A quick note, this story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and reflection. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but the lesson inside it is worth carrying with you. The drive back from Cincinnati should have taken 5 hours. I made it in 4.5. I don't know exactly when the feeling started, somewhere around the Kentucky border, maybe when the sky turned that flat gray color that comes before heavy snow, and the radio started cutting in and out. I'd been riding high all afternoon. Our crew had wrapped the Millbrook renovation 3 full days ahead of schedule, and my foreman, James Whitfield, had called around noon to congratulate me. "Go home early, boss," James said, and I could hear the grin in his voice. "Go surprise that little girl of yours. Lord knows you've been gone long enough." "I just might do that," I told him. I stopped at a gas station outside of Lexington and grabbed a bag of those cinnamon almonds Sophie had been asking for since October. I even picked up a small stuffed cardinal, Tennessee's state bird, because I'd spotted it near the register and thought of her immediately. She collected them, little stuffed birds lined up on her windowsill like a tiny chorus. I was smiling when I pulled back onto the interstate. I called Linda somewhere around Jellicoe, right where the mountains start pushing up on both sides of the highway. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I didn't think much of it. Linda was probably busy with her mother Margaret getting the house ready up in Gatlinburg. That had been the plan: spend a few days at Margaret's place in the mountains, wait for me to finish the project, then all drive home together for Christmas Eve. 10 minutes later, a text came through. I read it at the next red light. "We're all up here, signal is terrible. Don't rush. Come Christmas Eve like we planned. Love you." There was a photo attached. Linda and Margaret standing in front of a tall Douglas fir, decorated with gold ribbons, both of them holding mugs and smiling for the camera. Sophie wasn't in it. I stared at that photo longer than I should have at a red light. My chest did something uncomfortable. A small tightening, like a shoelace pulled one notch too tight. I typed back quickly. "Where's Sophie?" 3 minutes passed. Then, playing outside with some of the neighbor kids. You know how she is, can't keep her indoors. I set the phone down and drove. Here's the thing about Sophie that Linda always underestimated: my daughter does not play outside in December. Not in Tennessee, not in the mountains, not without sending me 17 text messages about how cold her fingers are, and could I please bring hot chocolate the moment I arrive. Sophie runs warm in conversation and ice-cold in temperature tolerance. She has her mother's stubbornness and my hatred of being cold. She had not texted me in 2 days, not a single message. Not a meme, not a blurry photo of something she thought was funny. Not even the little red cardinal emoji she sent every night before bed, because she knew it made me smile. 2 days of nothing from a 12-year-old girl who once sent me 43 messages in a single afternoon because she was bored and I was in a meeting. The tightening in my chest got worse somewhere around Campbell County. By the time I turned onto our street in Knoxville, I don't know why I drove to the house instead of straight to Gatlinburg, only that something pulled me there. Something I couldn't name. It was nearly 7 in the evening and the whole neighborhood was lit up like a postcard. The Hendersons across the street had those big, colorful bulbs strung along their gutters. The Pattersons next door had inflatable snowmen on their lawn. Every single house on Birchwood Circle was glowing warm and gold against the dark. Our house was completely dark. I sat in the driveway with the engine running for a moment, just looking at it. No lights on the porch, no wreath on the front door. Sophie and I had bought one together at the farmer's market 3 weeks ago. A fat cedar wreath with pine cones and a red velvet bow, and I'd watched her hang it herself, standing on her tiptoes with her tongue pressed between her teeth in concentration. The wreath was gone. My hands felt strange on the steering wheel, like they belonged to someone else. I cut the engine and got out. The front door was unlocked. "Sophie." My voice sounded wrong in the empty hallway, too loud, swallowed up too fast. "Soph, you here, baby?" Nothing came back. I turned on the hallway light, and that's when I saw it, Sophie's winter coat. The puffy orange one she called her astronaut jacket, hanging on its usual hook by the door. I touched the sleeve. It was cold. Not worn recently cold. Just cold. I moved through the house faster now, my heart doing something percussive and unpleasant against my ribs. Kitchen empty dishes in the rack from what looked like 2 days ago. Living room dark TV off the throw blanket Sophie always stole from the couch, still crumpled in the corner, exactly where she'd left it. Her bedroom bed made, which meant no one had slept in it. Her backpack sitting against her desk like she'd just come home from school. And on her nightstand, her allergy medication. The prescription strength stuff she took every single morning without fail. You don't pack your daughter for a trip to the mountains and leave behind her winter coat and her allergy medication. I was already moving toward the back door when James called. "Hey," he said, "just checking you made it home okay. You left so fast." "James?" I pushed through the back door into the cold. "Did you know I was coming home early? Did you tell anyone?" "What? No, just you. Why is everything?" "I'll call you back." I hung up and stood on the back steps. The yard was dark. Snow had come down light and steady all day, barely an inch, but enough to show footprints. And there were footprints on the path that sheek along the side of the house toward the detached garage in the back corner of the lot. Small ones, the size of a child's boot. The garage had originally been my workshop. I'd insulated the walls myself 5 years ago to block the noise when I ran. The table saw late at night. The walls were thick. The single window near the ceiling was fixed shut. I'd sealed it during a drafty winter and never reopened it. There was a metal latch on the outside of the garage door, the kind you flip down to hold it closed. It was flipped down. I crossed the yard in 8 steps. My hands were shaking so badly that I fumbled with the latch twice before I got it open. I yanked the door, and the cold hit me, not the ordinary cold of an unheated room, but a deep, settled cold, the kind that has been there for a long time and sunk into every surface. "Sophie." The word came out broken. "Sophie." A small sound from the far corner. A rustling. I found her between 2 stacked storage boxes, curled on top of an old camping mat, with her knees drawn to her chest. She was wearing 2 sweaters, I could see the collars layered, and what looked like 2 pairs of socks stuffed into her sneakers. A thin fleece blanket, the one we used for backyard picnics in summer, was pulled up to her chin. Beside her 3 empty water bottles, a sleeve of crackers with maybe 4 crackers left, and a flashlight lying on its side, its beam completely dead, batteries drained to nothing. She had been in the dark. "Baby." I dropped to my knees on the concrete so fast I felt the impact in my teeth. "Sophie, I'm here, I'm right here." Her eyes opened. For 2 terrible seconds, she looked at me like she didn't know me, pupils wide, face pale and waxy, the way faces get when the body is working too hard just to stay warm. Then something clicked behind her eyes. Dad. Her voice came out as a cracked whisper, barely audible, like she'd used it up. Dad, you came. Before she could say anything else, she grabbed my sleeve with both hands. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone so cold. She pulled me closer, her cracked lips barely moving. Dad. The whisper was urgent, desperate. Don't let Grandma know you found me. Please. Something locked tight in my chest. I kept my voice steady. Grandma's not here, sweetheart. It's just me. She searched my face for a long moment, checking, making sure. And then something in her shoulders let go, like a breath she'd been holding for 3 days. She tried to sit up and started coughing. Instead, a deep, rattling cough that shook her whole frame and made my heart seize with something close to physical pain. Don't move, I've got you. I pulled my coat off and wrapped it around her shoulders, tucking it beneath her chin, with hands that would not stop trembling. She was cold, straight through, not just her skin, but the weight of her, the density of her, like the warmth had been pulled from her bones. How long? I managed. Sophie, how long have you been out here? She blinked slowly. Her lips were dry and cracked. I counted 2 nights, I think. I stopped being able to tell. 2 nights. She had been in this garage alone in the dark for 2 nights. I reached for her arm to help her up, and her sleeve slid back. Around both wrists, dark and unmistakable, were bruises. Not scraped on something bruises. Not bumped into a doorframe bruises. They were grip bruises, the kind left by fingers wrapped tight and holding on against resistance. Something happened in my chest that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't anger yet, it was something that came before anger. Something colder and more absolute. Who did this? I asked, and my voice came out very quiet. Sophie pulled the sleeve back down. Her chin wobbled once before she pressed it still. Grandma got really upset, she whispered. I was trying to use the phone and she grabbed me. She just wanted me to stop. Before I picked her up, I noticed Sophie's hand, the one that wasn't gripping my sleeve, was loosely curled around something. A folded piece of paper torn from what looked like a school notebook. She must have been holding it when she fell asleep, or maybe she'd kept it close in case someone opened that door and it wasn't me. I gently took it from her fingers. Sophie's handwriting, I reached for it. Sophie's handwriting. Neat at the top, shakier toward the bottom, like the cold had gotten into her fingers before she finished. This is a punishment room for kids who don't listen, or who have bad luck. I am here because I talked back, and because I found out something I wasn't supposed to know. I don't know how many days. If someone finds this, please call my dad. His name is David Carter. I am not allowed to call him myself. I didn't do anything wrong. I just want to go home. I read it twice. Then I folded it very carefully and put it in my inside jacket pocket close to my chest, where I kept things I needed to make sure I didn't lose. Then I lifted her into my arms. She weighed almost nothing against the cold. I carried her out of the garage and across the dark yard toward the house, and with every step I took, I was thinking only one thing. I almost didn't come home early. I almost waited until Christmas Eve. I didn't go straight inside. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to carry Sophie through the back door, crank the heat, and never let go of her. But something else, some quieter, steadier voice that had kept me functional through 20 years of managing construction sites and difficult clients, told me to stop. Document everything first. You don't get a second chance at a crime scene. I set Sophie gently on the back porch steps, keeping my coat wrapped tight around her shoulders. I need 2 minutes, I told her. Just 2 minutes, okay? Don't move. She nodded, her teeth chattering so hard I could hear them. I went back into the garage and turned on the overhead light, with my elbow careful not to touch the door handle again. Then I pulled out my phone and started photographing everything. The metal latch, the single high window sealed shut with caulk that had yellowed with age, the camping mat with the impression of Sophie's small body still pressed into it, the dead flashlight, the 3 empty water bottles, the sleeve of crackers with 4 left. I photographed it all, making sure the timestamp in the corner of each image was clearly visible. Then I saw it. Underneath the old tool bench along the back wall, half hidden behind a rusted paint can, was a cell phone. An older model, the screen cracked across one corner, the kind of spare phone people kept in a junk drawer for emergencies and forgot about until they needed it. I crouched down and looked at it without touching it. The screen was dark, but the phone was there, and I understood immediately what must have happened. Margaret had shoved Sophie toward the mat in the dark, moving fast, and the phone had slipped out of her coat pocket and skidded under the bench without her noticing. She'd walked out of that garage and driven to her party and never once thought about what she'd left behind. Close enough that Sophie could have seen it if she'd known where to look. Far enough back that a 12-year-old lying on a mat in the dark with no flashlight after the first night might never have found it. Sophie. I stepped back to the doorway. There's a phone under the workbench. Did you know it was there? She looked up at me with eyes that broke something open in my chest. I heard it buzz once, she whispered, on the first night, but I couldn't find it in the dark. After my flashlight died, I couldn't find anything. My jaw tightened so hard my back teeth ached. I photographed the phone in place position distance from the mat. Everything then left it exactly where it lay. I turned off the light, latched the garage door back the way I'd found it, and went to my daughter. I picked her up like she was 5 years old again. She didn't protest. She pressed her face into my neck, and I felt her exhale this long, shuddering breath, like she'd been holding it for 2 days straight, and my eyes burned so badly I had to blink fast and hard just to see where I was walking. Inside, I turned the heat up to 78. I sat Sophie on the kitchen counter and rubbed her hands between both of mine, working the cold, out finger by finger, while she watched me with those enormous dark eyes. "Does anything hurt?" I asked. "Besides your hands, my throat." She swallowed carefully. "And my stomach. I think from the crackers. They were the peanut butter ones." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Sophie, you're allergic to peanuts." "I know." Her voice was very small. "But I was really hungry, Dad." I grabbed her face in both hands, gently, carefully, and looked at her skin, her lips, her eyes. No hives, no swelling. Thank God, no swelling. "We're going to the hospital," I said. "Right now." "Dad." "Right now, sweetheart. No arguments." I wrapped her in the blanket from the couch, carried her to my truck, and buckled her into the passenger seat. Before I pulled out of the driveway, I made one phone call. "Michael." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I need you. Something has happened with Sophie. I'm taking her to the ER right now." Michael Grant had been my attorney and my friend for 2 decades. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Which hospital?" he said. "University of Tennessee Medical Center." "I'll be there in 45 minutes. I drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand holding Sophie's. Her fingers were still cold. She stared straight ahead through the windshield at the Christmas lights blurring past in the dark, and after a long moment, she turned to look at me. "Dad," she said quietly, "I tried to be brave." My throat closed up completely. I squeezed her hand tighter. "You were," I managed. "You were so brave, baby." She turned back to the window. Outside Knoxville glittered and glowed, every house on every street wrapped in light. The whole world looked warm from the outside. I pressed down on the accelerator and drove faster. The emergency room at University of Tennessee Medical Center smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, and something faintly sweet that I couldn't identify. Paper turkeys made by elementary school kids were taped along the nurse's station. Thanksgiving decorations nobody had bothered to take down yet. A tinny version of Jingle Bells played from somewhere deeper in the building. Sophie gripped my hand so hard her knuckles went white. A nurse took us back within minutes. The words, possible hypothermia, bruising, peanut allergy, exposure, moved us past the waiting room fast. They got Sophie into a gown and under heated blankets, while I stood in the corner of the exam room, trying to hold myself together with both hands. Dr. Patricia Wells arrived 7 minutes later. She was a compact woman in her mid-40s with silver-streaked hair pulled back tight, and the kind of calm that only comes from years of seeing the worst things people do to each other. She introduced herself to Sophie first, crouched down to eye level, spoke softly, asked Sophie's favorite color before she asked anything medical. Purple, Sophie said, her voice still rough. Dark purple, not light purple. Light purple is basically pink. Dr. Wells smiled like that was the most reasonable thing she'd ever heard. Then she began her examination. She checked Sophie's temperature, her oxygen levels, her hydration. She listened to her lungs and pressed gently on her abdomen. Sophie winced but didn't cry. When Dr. Wells asked her to hold out her arms, Sophie hesitated, that same small hesitation I'd seen in the garage, then slowly extended both wrists. Dr. Wells looked at the bruising for a long moment, without speaking. Then she picked up a small ruler from her coat pocket and measured the marks carefully, her face professionally still, but her jaw tightened. Just slightly. Just enough for me to see it. Sophie, she said gently, can you tell me how you got these marks on your wrists? Sophie looked at me. I gave her a small nod. My grandma grabbed me, Sophie said. I was trying to get to the phone and she grabbed both my wrists really hard and pulled me away from it. Dr. Wells wrote something on her clipboard. And how long were you in the garage, sweetheart? 2 nights. Sophie's chin trembled once before she steadied it. Maybe almost 3 days. I'm not totally sure. My flashlight stopped working. Dr. Wells stood up and turned to face me. Her eyes were steady, but something behind them was not. Mr. Carter, she said quietly, I need to let you know that Sophie's presentation is consistent with mild hypothermia and moderate dehydration. The bruising on her wrists is consistent with forcible restraint. Some of these bruises are at least 48 hours old. She paused. Tennessee law requires me to file a report with Child Protective Services when I have reasonable cause to suspect abuse or neglect. I'll be doing that tonight. I understand, I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Please do. She held my gaze for one more second, and in that second, I saw something pass across her face that wasn't clinical at all. It was fury, barely contained, professionally managed. She's going to be okay, Dr. Wells said firmly. The peanut exposure didn't trigger a full reaction. Her levels look stable. We'll keep her warm and hydrated overnight and monitor her. But physically, she's going to be okay. I nodded. My eyes burned so fiercely, I had to look up at the ceiling tiles and breathe through my nose until the feeling passed. Michael arrived 40 minutes later, slightly out of breath, still in the sweater he'd clearly been wearing at home. He pulled me into the hallway while a nurse settled Sophie with warm apple juice and a heated blanket. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning. Leave nothing out. I told him. All of it. The dark house, the orange coat on the hook. The garage door latched from the outside. Sophie on the mat, the bruises, the dead flashlight, the phone under the workbench. Michael listened without interrupting, his expression getting progressively more still in the way that meant he was getting progressively more serious. When I finished, he put both hands on my shoulders and looked me straight in the eye. "David, listen to me carefully. Do not call Linda. Do not send her any messages. Do not touch any shared bank accounts or financial records. Do not post anything anywhere online." His grip tightened. "Everything you do from this moment forward needs to be something you'd be comfortable explaining to a judge. You understand me?" "Yes," I said. "Good." He released my shoulders. "Because this is bigger than a bad night. This is a legal situation, and we are going to handle it like one." Detective Carlos Ramirez arrived just after 10 o'clock. A solidly built man in his mid-40s with close-cropped gray hair and the unhurried manner of someone who had learned that rushing rarely helped. He spoke with Sophie briefly and gently, then came to find Michael and me in the family waiting area. He held up the evidence bag containing Margaret's phone, recovered from the garage, per my photographs and description collected by the first patrol officer on scene. "No passcode," Ramirez said. "And given that your daughter was found in a potentially life-threatening situation, and Mrs. Holloway's whereabouts were unknown, we had grounds to access it immediately for her safety." He opened his notebook. "I need you to hear these." He read the messages aloud. Margaret's voice through Ramirez's steady recitation. "She keeps trying to call her father. I've put her in the garage to calm her down." Linda's response. "Did you leave her food? Give her a few hours." Margaret again. "I have the Chattanooga party tonight. I might not be back until tomorrow." And then Linda's last message, the one that hit me somewhere behind my sternum like a closed fist. "I'm already at the airport. Handle it yourself. Don't let her call David." The fluorescent light above us buzzed and flickered. Down the hall, a baby was crying. The tinny Christmas music had finally stopped. "She knew," I said. The words came out flat and strange. "She knew exactly where Sophie was, and she got on a plane." Ramirez closed his notebook. "Mr. Carter," he said carefully, "I think you should prepare yourself. This investigation is going to go well beyond tonight." Sophie slept through most of the night. I did not. I sat in the recliner beside her hospital bed with a cup of coffee that went cold around midnight, and watched her chest rise and fall under 3 heated blankets. And every time she shifted or made a small sound in her sleep, my whole body went rigid until she settled again. The monitors beeped softly. The hallway outside stayed quiet. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, a nurse came in to check Sophie's temperature and gave me a look, the particular look that medical professionals give to parents sitting alone in dark hospital rooms, that was equal parts sympathy and heartbreak. "Her temp is back up to 97.8, the nurse said quietly. "She's doing really well." "Thank you," I said, and meant it more than those 2 words could hold. By 7 in the morning, Sophie was awake, sitting up and working through a tray of scrambled eggs, with the focused determination of someone who had not eaten properly in 3 days. Color had come back into her face. Her eyes were clear. She still winced when the blanket brushed her wrists, but she ate every bite on that tray and asked if she could have orange juice. Watching her eat made my chest hurt in a different way than it had the night before. This time it was not fear. It was something closer to grief. Karen Walsh arrived at 8:30. She was a slender woman in her late 30s with tired eyes and a warm handshake, carrying a canvas tote bag printed with the words, "Tennessee Department of Children's Services." She introduced herself to Sophie with a directness that I immediately respected. No baby talk, no forced cheerfulness, just straightforward kindness. "I'm Karen," she said, pulling a chair close to Sophie's bed. "I work for the state, and my job is to make sure kids are safe. Is it okay if we talk for a little while? Sophie looked at me. I nodded. Okay, Sophie said. Your dad is going to wait just outside the door, Karen said. Not because you're in trouble, you're not in any trouble at all, but because sometimes it's easier to talk when it's just us. Is that all right? Sophie thought about it for 3 full seconds. Then she nodded. I stepped into the hallway and stood with my back against the wall and my arms crossed over my chest and stared at the linoleum floor and tried very hard not to put my fist through the drywall. James Whitfield found me like that 20 minutes later. He came around the corner still in his work jacket, steel-toed boots loud on the hospital floor, and when he saw my face, he stopped walking. Lord, he said, you look like you haven't slept in a week. 36 hours, Awa, I said. He pulled me into a brief, rough hug, the kind men who've worked construction together for 15 years exchange. Without embarrassment, then stepped back and looked at me seriously. How bad is it? Bad enough. I told him the summary version. Sophie in the garage. The bruises. The text messages. By the time I finished, James's jaw was working like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. David. He dropped his voice low. I need to tell you something. I should have said it a month ago, and I didn't, and I'm sorry for that. He pulled off his cap and turned it in his hands. I drove past your house one night maybe 6 weeks back around 11 o'clock. There was a car in your driveway I didn't recognize. Black Audi, nice one. I figured maybe Linda had people over. But then I saw it again 2 weeks later, same car, same time of night, and a third time after that. Something cold moved through me. What did you do? Nothing. James said the word like it tasted bad. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I was probably reading into something that wasn't there. He met my eyes. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. Before I could respond, Karen Walsh stepped into the hallway and quietly asked James to give us a moment. He nodded and moved down the corridor, still turning his cap in his hands. Karen closed the door behind her and turned to face me. She had the expression of someone who was about to say something difficult and had decided to say it plainly rather than carefully. Sophie is a very brave young woman, she began, and she told me a great deal this morning. What came out over the next 10 minutes rearranged everything I thought I knew. Sophie had seen Linda and a man named Eric kissing in the driveway 3 months ago. She had overheard conversations in the kitchen, in the living room, in the car, about a property deal involving the house my father had left her. She understood enough to know the plan required my signature, that I had refused, and that Linda and this man Eric were trying to find another way around me. And then Karen told me the part that made my knees go genuinely weak. Linda had been making Sophie record videos, sitting her down in front of a phone camera and feeding her lines to read aloud. Dad comes home late smelling like beer. Dad yells when he's angry. I'm scared sometimes when Dad loses his temper. Things that had never happened. A script handed to a 12-year-old girl who loved her father and recorded over and over until the delivery sounded natural enough. Sophie said she refused several times, Karen said carefully. When she refused, she was told she would be sent to a residential behavioral program out of state. She didn't know if that was a real threat or not. She was scared enough to believe it might be. The hallway tilted slightly. I put one hand on the wall. My daughter, I said slowly, was being used to build a court case against me. That appears to be the intent, yes. Karen's voice was steady, but her eyes were furious. I also want you to know this kind of threat, telling a child that disclosure will result in losing a parent, is a recognized isolation technique. Sophie didn't stay quiet because she didn't want to tell you. She stayed quiet because she was terrified that telling you would make things worse for both of you. I pushed off the wall and walked 3 steps down the hallway and stopped because there was nowhere to go. My hands were shaking. My eyes were burning again. I pressed the heel of my palm hard against my forehead and breathed through it until the shaking slowed. Then I turned around and walked back. "What do I do?" I asked. Karen looked at me steadily. "You let us do our job," she said, "and you go home with your attorney and you look very carefully at everything in that house." The house felt different in daylight. Not emptier, it had felt empty since last night. Just different. Like a place I was seeing clearly for the first time after years of looking at it through fogged glass. Michael sat up at the desk in the home office while I made coffee neither of us would actually drink. He'd brought a small external drive and a piece of software he used for business disputes. "Nothing dramatic," he said. "Just a forensic scanning tool that could surface hidden or recently accessed files that a normal search wouldn't catch." "Give me 20 minutes, he said, plugging in. I gave him 12 before he called me in. "David." His voice had that particular flatness that meant he was controlling something. "Come look at this." The folder was buried inside the calendar app, the old one Linda had switched off 2 years ago when she moved everything to her phone. Nobody used that app anymore. Nobody would think to look there. The folder was labeled Personal L in lowercase nothing that would catch the eye. Inside were 23 video files. Michael opened the first one, and we watched together. Sophie sat in the kitchen, our kitchen, the one with the yellow walls she'd helped me paint when she was 8, with her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes fixed on something just off camera. She was wearing the blue sweater, the one I'd given her for her birthday in September. I remembered watching her open the box, remembered the way her whole face had lit up. She was wearing that sweater when she spoke the words that someone else had written for her. "Dad comes home late a lot," Sophie said on the screen in a voice that was almost right, but not quite too flat, too careful, the voice of someone concentrating hard on remembering lines. "Sometimes he smells like he's been drinking. It scares me when he gets loud." My coffee cup cracked against the desk, harder than I intended. Michael paused the video without a word. He opened the next one. Same kitchen. Different outfit. Same careful, hollow delivery. We watched 4 of them. I couldn't watch a 5th. "The birthday sweater," I said. My voice came out wrecked. "She's wearing the birthday sweater in the first one. I gave her that on September 14th. Linda started recording these the same week as Sophie's birthday party." Michael closed the laptop. "David." "While I was cutting the cake," I said. The words felt like they were coming up through gravel. "While I was standing in our backyard putting candles on a chocolate cake because Sophie said she wanted funfetti, but then changed her mind to chocolate at the last minute, and I drove back to Kroger to get a new one." My throat closed. I pressed both hands flat on the desk and breathed. Linda was already planning this. Michael put a hand on my shoulder. "I know." "How many?" I asked. 23 files. Earliest date is September 15th. The day after Sophie's birthday. "There's something else," Michael said carefully. "The date on the first recording, September 15th, matches something Karen Walsh mentioned this morning. I want to check the CPS database before I say anything more." He was already reaching for his phone. "But David, I think this started even earlier than we realized." Michael's phone call to Karen Walsh lasted 11 minutes. I stood by the kitchen window and watched a cardinal land on the bare branch of the oak tree in our backyard, a real one red as a stop sign against the gray December sky, and told myself to breathe normally while Michael talked in the next room. I could hear the low murmur of his voice, but not the words. That was probably deliberate on his part. When he came back into the kitchen, he set his phone face down on the counter and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him in 20 years of friendship. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even surprise. It was something closer to a cold, clinical fury, the expression of a man who has just had a suspicion confirmed that he desperately wished had stayed a suspicion. 3 months ago, he said, someone filed an anonymous report with the Tennessee Department of Children's Services. The report alleged that you were neglecting Sophie during extended work trips, that you left her unsupervised, that you were emotionally unavailable, that she showed signs of anxiety related to your absences. My stomach dropped straight to the floor. CPS investigated. Michael continued, his voice precise and controlled. They found no evidence to support the claims. The case was closed. But the file still exists in the system, David. It never goes away. I turned away from the window. Linda filed it. The report was anonymous. We can't prove who filed it yet. Michael held up one hand. But the timing matches September 15th, the same day she started recording Sophie's videos. And Karen Walsh, who has done this work for 12 years, told me she has seen this exact pattern before. Anonymous CPS report, followed by recorded statements from the child, followed by a custody filing that references both. He paused. It's a setup. A slow, careful 3-month setup. The cardinal flew away. The branch bounced once and went still. She was going to use it, I said. The pieces were assembling themselves in my chest, like something being built out of broken glass. If I found out about Eric and made a move, if I filed for divorce first, she'd reactivate that CPS file, combine it with Sophie's videos, walk into court with a ready-made package that made me look like an unfit father, and request emergency custody before you had time to respond, Michael said. By the time you gathered yourself and built a counter-argument, she'd already have Sophie and control of the estate. He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. David, she didn't build a backup plan. She built the whole architecture of a legal ambush. Every piece was already in place. I sat down across from him because my legs decided they were done holding me upright. The house, I said. Dad's house. That's what this is all about. Always was. Michael folded his hands on the table. Karen is flagging the anonymous report to her supervisor today. Filing a false report with CPS is a criminal offense in Tennessee. It carries real consequences, separate from everything else Linda is already facing. He reached for his phone and made a second call. This one was shorter. When he hung up, he said, Judge Helen Marsh has been notified about this case. She handles family court here, and she's been on the bench for 18 years. Karen told me something useful. Judge Marsh has seen this particular pattern 4 times in the last decade. 4 families where an anonymous CPS report was followed by recorded child statements and a custody filing. What happened in those cases, I asked. Michael looked at me steadily. She saw through it every single time. Something in my chest loosened by exactly 1 degree. Not relief, it was too early for relief, but something like the first small breath after being held underwater. Then the front doorbell rang. Michael and I looked at each other. He stood up first, and something shifted in his posture, shoulders back, chin level, the bearing of a man stepping into a professional situation rather than a personal one. Are you expecting anyone? He asked. No, I said. We walked to the front door together. Through the narrow window beside it, I could see a woman standing on the porch, older, gray-haired, hugging a phone to her chest, with both arms like it was something she was afraid of dropping. She was staring at the welcome mat, with the expression of someone who had been arguing with herself for a very long time about whether to ring that bell. Michael opened the door. The woman looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her voice, when it came, shook at the edges. I'm Carol Hutchins, she said. I live directly across the street. I've been standing in my driveway for 20 minutes, trying to decide if I had the right to come over." She pressed her lips together hard. "I have photographs of the garage. I've had them for 2 days, and I didn't know what to do, and I am so sorry it took me this long." Before I tell you what I discovered, next comment, clock, below, so I know you're still here. Because what Sophia and I found in that room changed everything I thought I understood about my own house. Note this story contains fictional elements built to illuminate something true about the human experience. If this isn't for you, no judgment. But for everyone staying, what comes next will surprise you. We brought Carol Hutchins inside. She sat at the kitchen table, with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she hadn't asked for, but accepted gratefully. And she looked around our kitchen the way people do when they've spent years watching a house from across the street and are finally seeing the inside of it for the first time. Her eyes moved to the yellow walls, to the child's artwork still held to the refrigerator, with magnets to the framed photo of Sophie and me at Dollywood. From 2 summers ago, Sophie grinning so wide her eyes had nearly disappeared. Carol looked at that photo for a long moment. Then she pressed her lips together and looked back down at her coffee. "I should start from the beginning," she said. "Please," Michael said. She had been watching our house for years, the way good neighbors do, not intrusively, just aware. She knew Sophie's school schedule by the rhythm of the mornings. She knew my truck. She knew Linda's car. So when she looked out her front window on the morning of December 19th and saw Margaret Holloway directing Sophie toward the detached garage, while Linda stood on the back porch, watching, something in her chest went tight and wrong. Sophie was pulling back, Carol said, her voice dropping. Not throwing a fit, not crying, just pulling back the way a child does when they don't want to go somewhere. And Margaret had her by the arm. She stopped, swallowed hard. I put on my coat and went across the street. Margaret had answered the door before Carol even knocked, like she'd seen her coming. She was very calm, Carol said, very composed. She told me Sophie had been acting out for several days and that her therapist had recommended a structured behavioral timeout in a low-stimulation environment to help her regulate. Carol's voice tightened with something between embarrassment and fury. She used all the right words. Regulate, low stimulation, structured intervention. She sounded like she knew exactly what she was talking about. "And you believed her," Michael said. Not accusatory, just a statement. "I was a school teacher for 31 years. Carol's chin lifted slightly. "I know what a behavioral intervention looks like. What Margaret described, it didn't sound right to me. But she used enough professional language that I second-guessed myself. I thought maybe this is something new. Maybe I'm behind on current practice." She set her mug down firmly. I should have trusted my gut. She had gone home and stood at her front window and watched the garage door. No one came out. An hour passed. 2 hours. Around 4 in the afternoon, she called the non-emergency police line and reported a concern about a child being kept in an unheated garage. "They were polite," she said, and the word came out with a bitter edge. "They told me that if a parent or guardian had placed a child in a supervised timeout situation on private property, there was limited basis for immediate intervention without evidence of direct physical danger. They said, if I observed anything more concerning, to call back." She had started photographing the garage at 5 o'clock that evening, every 2 to 3 hours after that. Through the night, through the next day. She pulled out her phone and slid it across the table to me. I picked it up. The first photograph was time-stamped December 19th at 5:14 p.m. The garage door closed. No light visible anywhere around the frame. The second was 7:47 p.m. The same. Then 10:22. Then 1:09 in the morning. Then 4:36 a.m. Every photograph the same, a closed door. A dark window, a thin line of snow along the bottom of the frame that got slightly thicker with each image as the night progressed. 31 photographs. 2 days and 2 nights of Carol Hutchins standing at her window in the dark, photographing a garage door and praying she was wrong about what was behind it. My hands were not steady. I could feel the tremor working its way up from my fingers to my wrists to my forearms, and I gripped the phone tighter to stop it from showing. The last photograph was time-stamped December 21st at 6:48 p.m., 17 minutes before I had pulled into the driveway. If I had come home even half an hour later, Carol would have called 911. She had already decided. She had her phone in her hand. "Mrs. Hutchins." My voice came out rougher than I intended. "Why are you apologizing to me?" She looked up. Her eyes were wet, and she was blinking hard against it, her jaw tight with the effort of not crying in someone else's kitchen. "Because I stood at that window for 2 days," she said, "and I took pictures instead of breaking down that door." And every hour I told myself maybe Margaret was right. Maybe I didn't understand. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked. A tear broke free and she wiped it away with the back of her hand, quick and almost angry. That little girl waved at me every single morning when she left for school. Every morning for 4 years. And when she needed someone to do more than take pictures, I talked myself out of it. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "You came here today," I said. "That matters." She nodded, pressing her lips tight. Then she straightened in her chair, squared her shoulders, and looked at Michael with clear, steady eyes. "Tell me what you need from me," she said. "Whatever it is, I'll do it." Michael was already reaching for his legal pad. "Let's start," he said with a formal witness statement. By 2 in the afternoon, Carol Hutchins had gone home with Michael's business card and the knowledge that someone would call her within 24 hours. Ramirez had come and gone twice, once to collect Carol's formal statement, once to update us on what his team had confirmed overnight. Michael spread everything across the dining room table. The photographs, the printed text messages from Margaret's phone, the video files from the hidden folder, the CPS report documentation Karen Walsh had emailed over that morning. He laid them out in a grid, methodical and precise, the way I'd seen him organize evidence in business disputes, except those had never made my stomach clench like this. "Here is where we stand," Michael said, standing at the head of the table. "We have the text messages between Margaret and Linda recovered legally under exigent circumstances, because Sophie's welfare and Margaret's location were both unknown at the time of recovery. We have 31 photographs from Carol Hutchins with unbroken timestamps. We have 23 video files from a shared computer that you have every legal right to access. We have a fraudulent anonymous CPS report that Karen Walsh has flagged to her supervisor." He paused. "What we do not yet have is Eric Dawson." "What do we need from him?" I asked. His own words. Ramirez leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Right now, everything we have points at Linda and Margaret. Eric is the thread that connects all of this to the property deal. Without him talking, his involvement stays circumstantial." Michael pulled out a printed flight manifest. I didn't ask how he'd gotten it, and he didn't offer to explain. "Linda and Eric fly back from Aspen tomorrow morning. They land at Nashville at 9:05. He looked at Ramirez. "Margaret is flying separately from Chattanooga. She arrives in Knoxville at 7:40 a.m. She has a commitment at 10 o'clock. Ramirez nodded. "The gala." I looked up. "What gala?" Michael slid a printed event program across the table. The letterhead read, "Knoxville Children First Annual Holiday Gala," in dark green script decorated with small holly leaves. Underneath, in bold, "Special Recognition Award, Margaret Holloway, co-founder." I stared at it. A sound came out of me that was not quite a laugh, something shorter and harder than that, pushed out by disbelief. "She is receiving a community service award," I said slowly, "for protecting children. Tomorrow morning at 10, Ramirez said. "Convention Center on Hill Avenue." I set the program down carefully because if I held it any longer, I was going to crumple it into something unrecognizable. "My plan," Ramirez continued, "is to intercept Eric at the Nashville airport before he reaches Linda. Invite him in for a conversation separately. He won't know what we have. People tend to make decisions quickly when they're alone and surprised." He glanced at Michael. "As for Margaret, 2 of my investigators will meet her at the convention center before the award presentation. They'll escort her to the CPS office, quietly. No scene." "And Linda?" I asked. "Linda arrives an hour after Eric. By the time she lands, Eric will have already made his choices." Ramirez's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "She'll come to the CPS office thinking it's a routine inquiry about Sophie's whereabouts. She won't know we have the recordings, the videos, or Eric's statement." Michael looked at me. "David, tonight you need to call Linda." Every muscle in my body resisted the idea simultaneously. "I need you to call her," Michael said, his voice firm and quiet. "And tell her you're still in Cincinnati. Let her talk. Tennessee is a one-party consent state, which means you can legally record any phone call you are a participant in without notifying the other party. Ramirez will be present as a witness, which further establishes the recording's validity in court." He held my gaze. "Do not argue with her. Do not confront her. Do not give her any reason to suspect anything has changed. Just let her talk." "She's going to ask about Sophie," I said. "Yes," Michael said. "She is." The word landed in the room like something dropped from a height. We all understood what it meant that Linda would ask about Sophie with the easy confidence of someone who believed Sophie was exactly where they'd left her, that the question itself would be its own kind of evidence. I pulled out a chair and sat down. "What time tonight?" I asked. 9 o'clock, Ramirez said. "My office. I'll have the recording equipment ready." I nodded. Then I looked at the event program still sitting on the table. Margaret Holloway, co-founder, Special Recognition Award. "One more thing," I said. "The gala tomorrow. I don't want to be there." Michael raised an eyebrow. "I don't need to watch it," I said. "Whatever happens there, I don't need to see it. I need to be at the hospital with Sophie when it happens." I looked at Ramirez. "Can your people handle it without me?" Ramirez studied me for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, not quite respect, but adjacent to it. "Yes," he said simply. "They can." But I pushed back from the table and stood up. My legs felt steadier than they had all day, not because anything had gotten easier, but because for the first time since I'd pulled into that dark driveway last night, I knew exactly what the next 18 hours looked like. I went back to the hospital. Sophie was sitting up in bed trying to teach herself a card game from a YouTube tutorial on the hospital tablet. Her reading glasses perched on her nose, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. She looked up when I walked in, and her whole face changed that particular brightness that children reserve for the people they feel safest with, the expression that lands somewhere between relief and joy. "Dad." She pulled out her earbuds. "I figured out how to play solitaire. Did you know there are like 40 different versions?" My chest ached with something so sharp and so sweet at the same time that I had to clear my throat before I could answer. "Show me," I said, pulling up the chair beside her bed. She showed me. We played 3 rounds. She beat me twice. Ramirez's office smelled like old coffee and printer ink, and the particular staleness of a room where people spent too many hours doing difficult work. It was 9 o'clock, exactly when I sat down across from his desk. Michael took the chair to my left. Ramirez set a small digital recorder on the desktop beside my phone, checked the levels twice, and gave me a single nod. "Whenever you're ready," he said. I was not ready. I doubted I would ever be ready. But I picked up my phone and I called my wife's number, and while it rang, I pressed my free hand flat against my thigh and focused on keeping my breathing even. Linda answered on the second ring. "David." Her voice was warm and relaxed, the voice of someone sitting somewhere comfortable, a glass of something in hand, no reason in the world to be anything but at ease. "I was wondering when you'd call. How's Cincinnati?" "Cold," I said. "How's everyone up there?" "Good, good. Mom made her cornbread stuffing tonight. You know, the one Sophie always steals half of before it even hits the table." She laughed lightly. "We missed you." My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my back teeth. Sophie had not eaten her grandmother's cornbread stuffing. Sophie had eaten peanut butter crackers she was allergic to because there was nothing else in the garage where she'd been locked for nearly 3 days. "How is Sophie?" I asked. My voice came out level, steady. I was proud of it and sickened by the pride simultaneously. "Oh, she's great. Worn out, you know how she gets when she's been running around with other kids all day. She crashed about an hour ago." A small pause. "She asked about you before she went to sleep. Wanted to know if you'd be home by Christmas morning." Across the desk, Ramirez was watching me with calm, careful eyes. Michael had his legal pad open but wasn't writing. Neither of them moved. "Can I talk to her?" I asked. "Honey, she's sound asleep. I'd hate to wake her." Another light laugh. "You know how grumpy she gets when someone wakes her up. I'll have her call you first thing in the morning, okay?" "Sure," I said. "That sounds good." We talked for 4 more minutes. Linda told me about the weather in the mountains, about Margaret's neighbor who had brought over a pecan pie, about a movie they'd all watched that afternoon. She asked twice if I was eating properly. She told me to drive carefully on the way home Christmas Eve, because the roads through Campbell County could get icy. She sounded like my wife. She sounded like the woman I had built a life with for 20 years. And somewhere in Aspen, Colorado, she was doing it while our daughter was in a hospital bed 40 minutes away. When we hung up, I set the phone on the desk and looked at my hands. They were shaking. Not visibly, I had held them still enough during the call, but underneath, in the tendons and the bones, they were shaking badly. "She didn't hesitate once," I said. "No," Ramirez agreed. "She didn't." He stopped the recorder and labeled the file with the date and time. "That recording is now evidence, David. Every lie she told on that call is documented." Michael put his hand briefly on my shoulder and then removed it, which was the right thing to do. I didn't want comfort right then. I wanted to be angry somewhere private, and there was no private anywhere tonight. Ramirez's desk phone rang 20 minutes later. He answered it, listened for less than 30 seconds, and said, "Send him through to my line." Then he looked at us. "This might be relevant. A Pastor Tom Ridley is calling the tip line. He asked specifically to speak with the detective handling a case involving a child in Knoxville." He put the call on speaker. Pastor Tom Ridley had a deep, deliberate voice, the voice of a man accustomed to choosing words carefully in front of groups of people. He introduced himself as the senior pastor of Riverside Community Church on Kingston Pike, and he explained that a member of his congregation, a woman who lived across the street from our address, had mentioned the situation to him earlier that evening, deeply distressed. "I recognized Margaret Holloway's name immediately," he said. "Margaret has attended our church for 11 years. She was someone I trusted deeply." A long exhale. "2 weeks ago, she asked me a favor. She asked me to confirm if anyone inquired that she had not been at home on December 19th. She said there might be some confusion about her whereabouts, and she wanted someone reliable to vouch for her schedule." "And you agreed?" Ramirez asked. "I did." The pastor's voice tightened with what sounded like genuine shame. She told me it was related to a neighborhood dispute and a misunderstanding about a parking issue. It seemed harmless. Margaret had never given me reason to doubt her in 11 years. Another pause. When I heard this evening that a child had been hospitalized, I understood immediately that I had been used to provide a false alibi. I cannot be party to that. I will not be. Ramirez leaned forward. Pastor Ridley, I need to ask you to come into the station tomorrow morning to provide a formal statement. Before 10 o'clock, if possible. I'll be there at 8, the pastor said. I'll bring my calendar and everything Margaret said to me in writing. She sent me a text confirming what she wanted me to say. I saved it. His voice dropped lower. I am so sorry I didn't ask more questions. After Ramirez hung up, the three of us sat with that for a moment. Then Michael opened his legal pad and wrote something at the top of a fresh page. Margaret prepared a false alibi through her own pastor, he said, almost to himself, using a written text message that she apparently forgot would constitute evidence. He looked up. These people were very careful about some things, and extraordinarily careless about others. People who think they're untouchable usually are, Ramirez said. My phone buzzed on his desk. A text from Michael's paralegal he'd had her pulling financial records all afternoon. Michael read it over my shoulder. Then he went very still. David, he said quietly, when did Linda last update your joint financial documents? I don't know, 8 months ago maybe. She said she was handling some paperwork updates, and I signed where she told me to. I looked at him. Why? Michael turned the phone so I could read the screen. Because 8 months ago, he said, someone increased your life insurance policy to $2 million, and the sole beneficiary isn't Sophie. Before I tell you what Michael found in those financial records, something that made both of us go completely cold, drop a 10 in the comments right now, so I know you're still with me. Because what comes next changes everything we thought we understood about how far this had actually gone. Note the story ahead contains fictional elements woven in for depth and storytelling. If that's not your thing, no pressure to stay, but if you're still here, you won't want to miss this. The number sat on the screen between us like something that had fallen from a great height and hadn't finished landing yet. $2 million. I read it 3 times. Then I set the phone down on Ramirez's desk and stood up and walked to the window because I needed something to look at that wasn't a number on a screen or Michael's carefully controlled expression or Ramirez's steady, patient face. Outside Knoxville was dark and cold and strung with Christmas lights that blurred soft and watercolor through the glass. Walk me through it, I said. Exactly. Michael picked up the phone and read from the paralegal's message. 8 months ago, a change of beneficiary form and a policy increase request had been submitted to our insurance provider. Both documents bore my signature or something close enough to my signature that the provider had processed them without question. The policy had been increased from $1 million to $2 million. The sole beneficiary had been changed from a shared designation split between Linda and Sophie's educational trust to Linda Carter exclusively. Sophie's name had been removed entirely. Is it legal? I asked. My voice came out flat and controlled and completely unlike how I felt. The change itself. Michael set the phone down. A spouse increasing a partner's life insurance is legal, yes. Wives do it. Husbands do it, usually without discussion. Providers rarely question it. He folded his hands on the desk. The signature is the question. If that's your genuine signature, this is uncomfortable but not criminal. If it isn't, I said. I haven't touched our insurance paperwork in 3 years. Then that's a second instance of potential document fraud, separate from anything related to Sophie's property. Michael's voice was precise, deliberate, building an argument brick by brick, the way he always did when he was angry, and refused to let the anger run the room. But David, I need you to hear what I'm about to say very carefully. I turned from the window. I am not telling you this woman planned to harm you, Michael said. I don't know that, and neither do you, and we are not going to speculate about it in this room or anywhere else. He held my gaze steadily. What I am telling you is that 8 months ago, exactly when the value of Sophie's property jumped after the commercial zoning announcement, someone in your household began preparing for a version of the future in which you were either gone or financially neutralized. They filed a false CPS report. They began recording Sophie. They quietly removed your daughter as your insurance beneficiary. He paused. Whether the intent was sinister or simply ruthlessly strategic, the architecture is the same. She planned for every outcome. Ramirez, who had been quiet through all of this, spoke without looking up from his notes. 8 months ago, he said, is also when Eric Dawson first appears in Linda's phone records. First call was April 9th. The Christmas lights outside blurred a little more. I pressed the heel of my palm hard against my forehead and stood there and breathed through it, the whole weight of it, every layer, the 20 years, and the birthday cake and the yellow kitchen wall, and Sophie in that garage, and Linda's warm, relaxed voice on the phone an hour ago asking if I was eating properly. What do I do with this? I asked, not rhetorically, genuinely. Nothing tonight, Michael said firmly. Tonight this goes into the file, and tomorrow we let everything we've built do what it's supposed to do. He stood up and straightened his jacket with the crisp efficiency of a man closing one chapter and opening the next. What you do right now is go back to that hospital and sit with your daughter. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Karen Walsh, time-stamped 11:47 p.m. Sophie woke up a little while ago. She asked me to give you a message. She said to tell you she has something for you. She said you'd know what she meant. She's been holding on to it for a long time. I stared at that text for a long moment, turning it over in my mind. Something she'd been holding on to for a long time. Sophie, who had spent 2 months recording conversations she didn't fully understand, into an app she labeled like a homework assignment, who had been terrified and methodical and 12 years old all at once. I have to go, I said. Go, Michael said. I grabbed my coat. At the door I stopped and looked back at Ramirez, who was still at his desk, still writing the way he had probably been writing at that desk long after everyone else went home for years and years. Carlos, I said. It was the first time I'd used his first name. He looked up. Thank you, I said, for how you've handled this. He nodded once, a small, economical nod that managed to communicate both acknowledgement and the quiet, professional satisfaction of a man who did hard work and did it right. Drive carefully, he said. Roads are getting icy on the bridge. I drove carefully. I drove through a Knoxville that was asleep and glittering and utterly indifferent to the fact that everything in my life had rearranged itself beyond recognition in the last 48 hours. I drove past neighborhoods where people were wrapping presents and watching Christmas movies and tucking their children into warm beds, and I felt the distance between their lives and mine like a physical sensation, like pressure in my ears. Then I pulled into the hospital parking garage, and the distance closed because Sophie was in there. And nothing that Linda had done, nothing that Margaret had planned. Nothing that Eric had calculated or Pastor Ridley had been manipulated into or an insurance provider had processed without question, none of it had managed to change that one essential fact. Sophie was in there, and I was here. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor and walked down the hallway to room 314 and pushed open the door quietly in case she'd fallen back asleep. She hadn't. She was sitting up in bed with her reading glasses on and her tablet in her lap, and when she saw me, she reached immediately for something on the nightstand beside her. Something small, wrapped loosely in a piece of paper towel, the way children wrap things when they don't have proper wrapping paper, and held it out to me with both hands. "Karen said I could keep it until you got here," Sophie said. Her voice was still a little rough, but her eyes were bright and absolutely certain. "I've been saving it for a really long time, Dad. I didn't know when it would be safe to give it to you, but Karen said now is the right time." I sat on the edge of her bed and took it from her. "What is it?" I asked. "Open it," she said. Inside the paper towel was a tablet. Not a new one, an older model with a crack running diagonally across the bottom left corner of the screen. The kind of crack that happens when something is dropped on a hard floor, and then kept anyway because it still works. I recognized it immediately. It had been Sophie's first tablet, the one we'd bought her in 4th grade for schoolwork, replaced last year with a newer model. I thought we'd donated it. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "I kept it." Sophie pulled her knees up to her chest and watched me with those steady, serious eyes. "I hid it under the floorboard in my closet. The loose one by the back wall. I knew Mom never went in my closet." I turned the tablet over in my hands. The screen was dark. I pressed the power button, and it came to life, battery at 11% running on whatever charge was left from whenever Sophie had last used it. "Open the Notes app," she said. "The schoolwork one. Go to the folder called Science Project 3. My hands were not steady as I navigated the screen. The Notes app opened. There was the folder labeled in Sophie's careful handwriting font, sandwiched between folders called Math Review and History Essay Outlines, looking for all the world like homework. Inside were 47 audio files. They were labeled by date. The earliest was September 16th. The most recent was November 22nd, almost 4 weeks ago. "Sophie," my voice came out barely above a whisper. "What is this?" "I recorded them," she said simply. "Mom and Eric talked in the house a lot. In the kitchen, in the living room. Sometimes they forgot I was there, or they thought I was asleep." She swallowed. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough to know it was about Grandpa's house and about you. And I thought if something happened, if they did something bad, you would need proof. Her chin wobbled once. "Karen said I need to tell you that she already told Detective Ramirez about it, and he's going to come get the tablet tonight for the chain of evidence. She said you can listen to the copies they made, but the real one has to go with him." I set the tablet down on the bedside table very carefully, the way you set down something irreplaceable. Then I put both hands over my face. I was not crying. I was doing something adjacent to crying something that started in the chest and pressed outward in all directions at once without quite finding a way out. My shoulders shook once hard and I pulled them back and pressed my palms against my eyes and breathed. Sophie's hand landed on my arm. "Dad." Her voice was small and worried. "Did I do something wrong?" I took my hands away from my face. My eyes were burning, and I didn't try to hide it. "No," I said, and my voice broke cleanly down the middle on the single syllable. I cleared my throat and tried again. "No, sweetheart. You did everything right. You did more than right." I reached out and put my hand over hers. "I need you to understand something. What you did hiding that tablet, making those recordings, keeping them safe for 2 months, while you were scared, that took more courage than most adults I know have ever had to find." Sophie looked at me for a long moment. Then her face crumpled all at once, not gradually, not with warning, just suddenly and completely, and she made a sound I had never heard from her before, a high, broken sound, and then she was crying in earnest, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and has been held back for a very long time. I pulled her into my arms, and she pressed her face against my shoulder and cried so hard her whole body shook. And I held on and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would matter more than just holding on. We stayed like that for a long time. When she finally pulled back, her face was blotchy, and her eyes were swollen, and she looked simultaneously exhausted and lighter the way people look after they've put something down that they've been carrying too long. I was so scared, she said, her voice thick. Every time I recorded something, I thought they were going to find it. I put it under the homework folders because Mom always told me to do my homework, and she never actually looked at it. A sound came out of me that was half laugh and half something else entirely. That is the smartest thing I have ever heard. Sophie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Karen said the recordings have their voices on them. Eric's too. I know. Is it enough? She looked at me with an expression so direct and so exhausted and so 12 years old that it physically hurt to look at. Is it enough to fix things, Dad? I reached up and pushed the hair back from her forehead, the way I had when she was small and couldn't sleep. It's more than enough, I said. It's everything. She nodded slowly. Then she leaned back against her pillows and stared at the ceiling for a moment, processing something. Science Project 3, she said quietly. I named it that because we were doing a unit on ecosystems, and I figured if Mom ever looked, she'd think it was about food chains. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. It kind of is, I guess. Just a different kind. I laughed. A real one, short and startled out of me. Yeah, I said. I guess it kind of is. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. Michael. I answered it, and he spoke before I could say anything. Eric Dawson just agreed to come in tomorrow morning for questioning, he said. His attorney called Ramirez 20 minutes ago. He's coming voluntarily, which means he already knows the recording exists, and he's trying to get ahead of it. A pause. David. He's going to give us everything. I looked at Sophie, who had her reading glasses back on and was pulling the hospital tablet toward her with the businesslike air of someone returning to important work. Good, I said. I wasn't in the room when Eric Dawson talked. Ramirez had been clear about that from the beginning. I would not be present during the interview. Would not be in the building. When Eric arrived, would not have any direct contact with him at any point in the process. Michael had agreed without hesitation. The last thing either of them needed was a husband and father in the same room as the man who had helped dismantle his family, because no recording equipment in the world could have captured what would have come out of that room. So I sat in a coffee shop on Gay Street with a cup of dark roast I didn't taste and waited. Michael called at 9:47. It's done, he said. I set down the coffee cup. How long? And 22 minutes from the time Ramirez played the first recording. A pause. David, he gave up everything. His attorney barely had time to earn his fee. The coffee shop around me was full of people doing normal December things, laptop workers, a mother with a toddler in a high chair, two elderly men arguing cheerfully about University of Tennessee football. The espresso machine behind the counter shrieked and hissed. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. Tell me, I said. Michael told me. Eric Dawson had walked into the interview room with his attorney and the practiced ease of a man who believed he was smarter than the situation. He'd crossed his legs, straightened his jacket, and told Ramirez he was happy to clear up any misunderstanding about his professional relationship with Linda Carter. Ramirez had let him talk for 4 minutes. Then he'd opened his laptop, turned it so Eric could see the screen, and played 30 seconds of audio from Sophie's Science Project 3 folder. Eric's own voice, clear and unmistakable, discussing the structure of the property deal, the shell company, the below-market purchase price, the resale to the commercial developer, the margin Eric would pocket on the flip. Eric's attorney had leaned over and whispered something in his client's ear. Eric had gone the color of old chalk. He waived his right to further non-disclosure and began talking. He confirmed that the plan had originated with him approximately 10 months ago when he'd identified Sophie's inherited property as significantly undervalued relative to the incoming commercial development. He had approached Linda with the opportunity. Linda had been receptive. Over the following months, they had developed a relationship that was both personal and strategic, he said. Personal and strategic, with the flat effect of a man reading from a document, rather than describing something he had lived. He confirmed that Linda had promised to secure my signature on the sale after the holidays. When I had refused to sell the property the previous spring, they had begun developing an alternative approach, the divorce filing the custody arrangement, the petition to replace me as Sophie's property trustee. He confirmed that Linda had told him, in a recorded conversation, that Ramirez now possessed, that her mother would manage Sophie until after Christmas. He said he had not known Sophie would be confined to an unheated garage. He said this with great emphasis, leaning forward, his eyes moving between Ramirez and his attorney with the focused desperation of a man trying to find the exit in a burning room. Ramirez had asked him very calmly what he had understood manage Sophie to mean. Eric had not answered that question. When Ramirez moved to the insurance policy, Eric's attorney had tried to interject. Eric had spoken over him. "I didn't know about the insurance," he said. "That was Linda. I had nothing to do with that." Ramirez had noted his statement. Eric had then voluntarily surrendered his phone, his email login credentials, and access to the financial accounts associated with the shell company he had established for the property transaction. He had done all of this, Michael told me, with the brisk, cooperative energy of someone who has decided that the only remaining question is how much of the wreckage he can step away from. He had not asked about Linda once, not whether she knew about the interview, not whether she had been contacted, not what was going to happen to her. He had walked into that room tangled up with this woman's, in every way a person that can be tangled with another person, and he had spent 22 minutes methodically cutting every thread, and he had not asked about her once. "He didn't even hesitate," I said. "No," Michael said. "He didn't." I picked up my coffee cup and put it down again without drinking. "She chose him," I said. The words tasted like something left out too long. "She chose him over Sophie, over our family, over 20 years. I stopped, started again. "And he spent 22 minutes making sure she takes the worst of it." "Yes," Michael said, because there was nothing else to say to that. Outside the coffee shop window, Gay Street was strung with white lights that swayed in the December wind. A family walked past, 2 parents, 3 kids in matching red coats, the youngest one being carried on her father's shoulders, with her mittened hands pressed over his eyes so he couldn't see where he was going. He was laughing, navigating blind, completely trusting that someone would tell him if he was about to walk into something. I watched them until they were out of sight. "What time does Linda land?" I asked. 50 minutes, Michael said. "Ramirez has people at the airport. She'll be brought to the CPS office, not the station. Karen Walsh will be there. So will I." He paused. "You don't have to be there, David." "I know," I said, "but you want to be." I thought about Sophie in her hospital room reading glasses on working her way through whatever she'd found to occupy herself this morning. I thought about 22 minutes and a man who hadn't asked about Linda once. "No," I said, and meant it completely. "I want to be at the hospital. Tell me when it's done." I left $3 on the table for a coffee I hadn't touched and walked back out into the cold. Ramirez called me at 11:15 that morning. I was sitting in the chair beside Sophie's hospital bed, watching her sleep. She'd gone down hard around 10 after 2 nurses had come in for vitals, and the effort of being cheerful for them with them had apparently used up the last of her reserves. Her face in sleep looked younger than 12. It always had. Linda used to say Sophie slept like she was still 5 years old, curled tight on her side, with one hand tucked under her cheek. I didn't let myself think about Linda saying that for more than a second. When Ramirez's name appeared on my screen, I stepped quietly into the hallway. "It's done," he said. "I thought you'd want to know what happened at the convention center." "Tell me," I said. He told me in the measured, sequential way he told everything. No editorializing, no dramatic pauses, just facts laid end to end in the order they had occurred. I stood in the hospital corridor, with my back against the wall, and listened. Margaret Holloway had flown into McGee-Tyson Airport from Chattanooga at 7:40 a.m., collected her luggage, and taken a rideshare directly to the Knoxville Convention Center on Hill Avenue. She had arrived at 8:55, which Ramirez's investigator described as confident. She walked in through the main entrance without hesitating, nodded to the volunteers at the registration table, accepted a name badge, and moved toward the ballroom, like a woman who had done this many times before and expected today to be no different. The Knoxville Children First Annual Holiday Gala had been running for 12 years. The convention center ballroom held close to 300 people, donors, community leaders, local business owners, families, who had benefited from the organization's programs. The room was decorated in green and gold, with centerpieces made from toy donations that would be distributed to children in need after the event. A podium stood at the front of the room, beneath a banner that read, in letters large enough to read from the back row, "Protecting every child this holiday season." Margaret had taken her seat at the head table. At 9:45, 15 minutes before the award presentation was scheduled to begin, two of Ramirez's investigators had approached her table. They were not in uniform. They carried no visible equipment. One of them leaned down and spoke quietly near her ear, the way you'd deliver a private message to someone at a formal event, so as not to make a scene. "What did they say to her?" I asked. "They told her there was an urgent matter, requiring her presence at the CPS office, and that she needed to come with them immediately," Ramirez said. "They told her it concerned her granddaughter." "How did she respond?" A brief pause. "She asked if it could wait until after the award presentation." Something moved through me that was not quite anger and not quite contempt, and lived in the territory between the two. "They told her no," Ramirez continued. "She argued for approximately 90 seconds. Then she stood up, said something to the woman seated beside her that my investigator couldn't hear, and left the ballroom." "Without her award," I said. "Without her award," Ramirez confirmed. He continued. At 10 o'clock, the MC had approached the podium and begun the program. At 10:22, he had called Margaret's name for the special recognition presentation. The room had waited. Someone at the head table had leaned over and whispered to the event coordinator. The event coordinator had gone pale and stepped away to make a phone call. At 10:31, one of Ramirez's investigators, the one who had stayed behind, had approached the MC and spoken quietly to him for approximately 45 seconds. The MC had then returned to the podium and addressed the room. "What did he say?" I asked. "He said there was a situation that required them to pause the award portion of the program. He said it involved an ongoing investigation. He apologized for the disruption and asked if anyone had questions to please see the event staff." Ramirez's voice was carefully neutral. Then he stepped back from the podium. "That's it?" I asked. "That's all that happened?" "That's all that needed to happen," Ramirez said. I understood what he meant. In a room of 300 people who had donated money and time and trust to an organization that Margaret Holloway had co-founded on the premise of protecting children, all it took was a 4-word phrase: an ongoing investigation. The room would have done the rest. "How did people react?" I asked. Ramirez was quiet for a moment, which was itself a kind of answer. "My investigator said it got very quiet," he said. "Not angry, not dramatic, just quiet. The kind of quiet where everyone is thinking the same thing and nobody needs to say it out loud. Another pause. An older woman near the front, apparently a founding donor she'd been involved since the beginning, stood up, collected her things, and walked out. A few others followed. The event continued, but the award portion was removed from the program entirely. I pressed the back of my head against the hospital corridor wall and stared at the ceiling tiles. 12 years, I thought. 12 years of photographs at podiums of oversized checks and holiday luncheons of Margaret Holloway's name in the program under co-founder in green and gold script. 12 years of a community believing they knew who she was. One morning to undo all of it, not with drama, not with a confrontation or a video playing on a screen or voices raised in a public space. Just a quiet word from a man in a sport coat and an empty chair, and 300 people left alone with the space where their trust used to be. "David," Ramirez said. "Yeah." "Linda's car just pulled into the CPS parking lot." My chest tightened. I looked back through the window in Sophie's door. She was still asleep, her hand tucked under her cheek, her face younger than 12. "Is Michael there?" I asked. "Already inside." "Karen Walsh. She's been here since 9. I exhaled slowly. Everything was in place. Every piece where it was supposed to be. I had done everything Michael had told me to do, and Ramirez had done everything that needed doing, and Carol Hutchins had stood at her window for 2 days with a phone camera, and Sophie had hidden a cracked tablet under a loose floorboard for 2 months. Everyone had done their part. "Call me when it's over," I said. "You'll be the first one I call," Ramirez said, and hung up. I stood in the hallway for another moment. Then I pushed open Sophie's door and went back inside and sat down in the chair beside her bed. And I waited. Everything we had built, every recording, every photograph, every document was about to walk into one room. Before I take you there, drop a 72 in the comments. 72 hours. That's all it took. Michael called at 11:43. "She's inside," he said. "You should be here." I looked at Sophie, still asleep. Then I looked at my hands. Then I stood up, told the nurse at the station I'd be back within the hour, and drove to the CPS office on Middlebrook Pike with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. The waiting room smelled like industrial cleaner and burnt microwave popcorn. Karen Walsh met me at the inner door and walked me through a narrow corridor to a room I hadn't been in before, larger than an interview room, with a rectangular table and 6 chairs and a whiteboard on one wall that still had someone else's case notes on it in blue marker. Michael was already there, standing by the window. Ramirez stood near the door. Margaret sat at the far end of the table with her arms folded and her chin level, wearing the same blazer she'd had on for the award ceremony, her name badge still clipped to the lapel. She looked at me when I walked in, and something moved across her face that wasn't guilt and wasn't shame. It was calculation, the fast internal arithmetic of someone assessing how much damage had already been done. We didn't have to wait long for Linda. She came through the door in her travel clothes, dark jeans, a cream-colored sweater, her hair still perfect from whatever she'd done with it in Aspen, and she was already talking before she fully registered the room. I got a message that there was a question about Sophie's. She saw me. The sentence stopped mid-air. The color left her face so completely and so fast that I actually watched it happen, watched the warmth drain out from her cheeks like water out of a tub, leaving something pale and rigid underneath. Her hand came up and grabbed the door frame. Her knuckles went white around it. "David." My name in her mouth sounded like a question she didn't want answered. "Sit down, Linda," Michael said. Not unkindly, just clearly. She sat. Ramirez started with the text messages. He read them aloud from Margaret's phone, the same ones I'd heard in the hospital 2 nights ago, but hearing them in this room with Linda sitting 6 feet away made them land differently. Every word hit the table like something thrown from a height. Linda's first response was practiced and almost convincing. She hadn't known the garage had no heat. She'd believed her mother would check on Sophie within hours. It was meant to be temporary, a few hours, not days, never days. She would never have agreed to days. Margaret's head snapped up. "You said to handle it. Those were your exact words." "I said a few hours, Mother, not 3 days, not while you went to a party in Chattanooga. You were on a plane to Colorado. Because you told me—" "I told you nothing of the sort." Ramirez set his phone on the table and pressed play. Linda's own voice filled the room. "I'm already at the airport. Handle it yourself. Don't let her call David." The argument stopped. Linda's mouth closed, opened, closed again. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table so hard the tendons in the back of her hand stood out like cables. "That was—" she started. "Your voice," Ramirez said. "Your phone number, your cell tower, confirmed." Ramirez moved to the security footage next to the camera from our front porch backup system, the one Linda hadn't known existed. The footage showed the morning of December 19th with a clarity that left no room for interpretation. Linda standing on the back steps, Margaret's hand on Sophie's arm, Sophie pulling back, Linda watching, Linda turning away, Linda getting into the car. Linda stared at the footage with an expression I had never seen on her before, not in 20 years of marriage, not in arguments or grief or joy or any of the ordinary disasters of a shared life. It was the expression of someone watching themselves from the outside for the first time and not recognizing the person they saw. She tried once more. I didn't know how long. Ramirez opened his laptop and pressed play on a different file. Linda's voice again. Clearer this time. "Mom just needs to keep her quiet until after Christmas. Then everything is settled." Karen Walsh, who had been quiet in the corner the entire time, leaned forward and spoke for the first time. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "that recording was made by your daughter, on a tablet she hid under her bedroom floor. She made it because she was trying to protect her father." Karen's voice was steady and precise and completely without mercy. Sophie was 12 years old, and she understood what was happening in her own home better than anyone gave her credit for. Linda's jaw worked. Her eyes filled suddenly and completely, tears spilling over both cheeks at once. And I sat there and watched it happen and felt nothing that resembled sympathy, because somewhere across town my daughter was waking up in a hospital bed with bruises on her wrists. "Eric talked," Ramirez said quietly. Linda went absolutely still. "Before I tell you what happened the next morning, comment ready, so I know you're still with me. What I'm about to show you is the moment everything either falls apart or falls into place. A note. The story ahead contains fictional elements crafted to carry something worth hearing. If that's not for you, this is a good place to stop. For everyone staying, hold on tight." The stillness lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then Linda reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and called Eric Dawson. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail again. Her hand tightened around the phone so hard I heard the case creak. She lowered it to the table and stared at it the way you stare at something that has just revealed itself to be something entirely different from what you believed it was. "He turned off his phone," Ramirez said. "He's been in our office since 8:30 this morning." Linda's head came up slowly. Something happened behind her eyes, a rapid, visible reorganization, the same calculation I had seen when she first walked in, but faster now, more desperate, working through what had been given up and what might still be salvageable. "Whatever Eric told you," she said, her voice finding a kind of steadiness that cost her something to maintain, "he doesn't have the full picture. He came to me. I want to be clear about that. This was his idea originally. The property deal, the approach that was Eric. Margaret's chair scraped back from the table. "Don't you dare," Margaret said, her voice dropping to something low and furious. "Don't you sit there and make this his idea when you called me from that airport and told me to handle it. You used those words. Handle it." "I meant for a few hours, Mother. A few hours." Linda's voice cracked on the second few hours, and she pressed her lips together hard. "I didn't tell you to leave her there for 3 days. I didn't tell you to go to your party. That was your choice. And getting on that plane was yours." Margaret leaned forward. "You stood on those steps, and you watched me take that child into that garage, and you got in your car and you drove away. I watched you do it, Linda. I stood at the garage door, and I watched your taillights disappear down the driveway. You could have called me. I did call you 3 times. You sent me to voicemail." The room had gone very tight. Ramirez stood at the door with his arms at his sides, not moving, not intervening, just letting it run. Michael stood by the window with his legal pad open and his pen moving steadily, recording every word. Karen Walsh sat with both hands flat on the table and watched Linda and Margaret dismantle each other with the practiced patience of someone who had seen this exact scene before and knew precisely how it ended. I watched from across the table and felt something I hadn't expected to feel, not satisfaction, not relief, not the clean release of anger finally permitted an exit. What I felt was exhaustion so deep it had weight pressing down on my shoulders and the back of my neck settling into my spine. This was my wife. This was the mother of my daughter. This was 20 years. And it had come to this room, this table, these 2 women tearing into each other over who bore responsibility for leaving a 12-year-old alone in a garage in December while one went to Colorado and the other went to a holiday party in Chattanooga. Ramirez set a printed document on the table between them. "This is an email from Eric Dawson's account submitted voluntarily to our office this morning, along with his full digital record." Linda's eyes moved to the page. I watched her read the line Ramirez had highlighted in yellow, her own words sent from her own email address 6 weeks ago. "Mom will handle her until after Christmas. Then everything is settled." A sound came out of Linda that I can only describe as the sound of something structural giving way. Not a sob exactly, more like the exhale of someone who has been holding a wall up for months and has finally involuntarily let go. Margaret looked at the highlighted line and went rigid. "You put it in writing," Margaret said. "You sent this. I didn't think—" "You put it in writing, Linda." Karen Walsh leaned forward and spoke quietly, and without any particular emphasis, which somehow made it hit harder than if she'd raised her voice. "In 12 years of this work," Karen said, "I've sat in rooms like this one more times than I can count, and I've noticed something consistent." She looked at Linda, then at Margaret steadily and without expression. "The child is always the last person anyone in these rooms thinks about." Nobody responded to that. There was nothing to respond to. I pushed back my chair and stood up. Michael looked at me. One eyebrow moved slightly. "I'm going back to the hospital," I said. "David." Linda's voice caught on my name. I looked at her, fully directly for the first time since she'd walked through that door. I took in the cream sweater and the perfect hair and the tear-streaked face and the hands that were shaking now, both of them trembling, against the edge of the table. I had loved this woman for 20 years. I had built a house with her, raised a daughter with her, driven through ice storms, for her, sat with her through her father's illness and her mother's difficult years and every ordinary grief that accumulates in a life lived alongside another person. I had nothing left to say to her that belonged in this room. "Take care of yourself, Linda," I said. Then I walked to the door, and Michael stepped aside to let me pass, and I went out into the corridor and kept walking until I reached the elevator, and I pressed the button, and I stood there with my hands at my sides while the numbers counted down, and when the doors opened, I stepped in. Michael caught the doors before they closed. "David." His voice was quiet and very steady. "Judge Marsh signed the emergency order 20 minutes ago. It's official. Sophie stays with you." The elevator doors closed between us. I rode down alone. In the lobby, I pushed through the glass doors into the cold December air and stood on the sidewalk outside the CPS office on Middlebrook Pike and breathed long, slow, deliberate breaths, the kind you take when you are reminding your body that it is still working, that the worst is behind you, that the next thing you need to do is simply put one foot in front of the other and walk to your truck. I walked to my truck. I drove back to the hospital. Sophie was awake when I got back. She was sitting cross-legged on the hospital bed with a plastic tray of lunch she'd barely touched, macaroni and cheese going stiff at the edges, a carton of chocolate milk, an apple cut into slices that had started to brown. She had the hospital TV on low, some nature documentary about ocean creatures, and she was watching it with the distracted half-attention of someone whose mind was somewhere else entirely. She looked up when I came through the door, and her whole face shifted, that particular relief, immediate and unguarded, the expression children wear when the person they've been waiting for finally walks back into the room. "You were gone a long time," she said. "I know." I hung my coat on the hook by the door and pulled the chair close to her bed and sat down. "I'm sorry." She studied me for a moment, with those serious dark eyes that had always seen more than I gave her credit for. "Is it over?" she asked. "The whatever was happening this morning, is it finished?" "The hardest part is," I said. "There's still some legal stuff ahead, but the worst morning is done." She nodded slowly, processing that. Then she looked down at her macaroni and pushed a piece around with her fork. "Dad," she said without looking up, "is Mom in trouble?" I had been preparing for this question since I got in the elevator at the CPS office. I had turned it over on the drive back, testing different answers, discarding the ones that were too much, and the ones that were too little, looking for the version that was honest without being a weapon. "Yes," I said. "She is." Sophie's fork stopped moving. "Because of me, because of the recordings, because of choices she made," I said carefully. "The recordings didn't create the trouble. They just made sure the truth had somewhere to go." Sophie looked up. Her eyes were bright and dry. She wasn't going to cry. I could see that she had made some internal decision about this, but her chin had that particular set to it that meant she was working hard to keep something contained. "I still love her," Sophie said, "even though—" She stopped, started again. Is that weird?" My throat tightened so hard it took me a moment to answer. "No," I said. "That's not weird at all. That's just what love is sometimes. It doesn't go away because someone let you down. It just changes shape." Sophie thought about that. "Does yours?" I looked at my daughter, 12 years old, bruises fading on her wrists, lunch going cold on the tray, ocean creatures moving silently across the TV screen behind her, and I answered her as honestly as I knew how. "I don't know yet," I said. "I think I'm still figuring that out." She seemed to find that acceptable. She picked up her chocolate milk and drank half of it in one long pull, then set it down and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Michael arrived 20 minutes later, still in his coat, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the machine down the hall. He handed me one and gave Sophie a brief, warm smile. "How are you feeling?" he asked her. "Better," she said. "My wrists don't hurt as much." "Good." He looked at me. "Can I have a minute?" We stepped just outside the door. Michael kept his voice low. "The emergency order is a temporary ex parte order," he said. That means Judge Marsh issued it based on our filing alone. Linda wasn't present to respond. Under Tennessee law, that's fully permissible when there's documented risk to a child's immediate safety. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. It goes into effect immediately. Linda and Margaret are prohibited from unsupervised contact with Sophie until a full hearing. When's the full hearing? I asked. Judge Marsh has scheduled it for December 27th. That's the first available slot after the holiday. He paused. The comprehensive custody hearing will likely be in March. That's when everything, the recordings, the videos, the CPS report, the insurance documents, Carol Hutchins's photographs, Eric's statement, all of it gets presented formally in front of both parties. And until then, Sophie is with you. Legally, officially, on paper. He met my eyes. She's not going anywhere, David. I pressed my back against the corridor wall and exhaled a long, slow release of something that had been compressed in my chest since the moment I'd touched that garage door latch 2 nights ago. Thank you, I said, for all of it. For every phone call and every document and every hour of this. Michael waved it off the way he always waved off gratitude. A small dismissive gesture that meant he'd heard it, but wasn't going to make anything of it. Buy me dinner in the new year, he said, somewhere with a decent bourbon selection. Done, I said. He left, 20 minutes later. I went back into Sophie's room and found her lying down now, the TV still murmuring, her eyes half closed. I picked up her lunch tray and set it on the rolling cart by the door. I turned the TV down another notch. Dad? Sophie said, her voice already going soft at the edges the way it did right before sleep. Yeah. Next year I want a real Christmas tree. Not the fake one we always get. A pause. The kind that actually smells like pine. Not the spray. Something so sharp and so sweet moved through my chest that I had to turn away for a moment toward the window. Deal, I said. With the lights that aren't all the same color, she added her words, slurring slightly now. The old-fashioned ones, multicolored. The full package, I said. Yeah. A long exhale. The full package. By the time I turned back from the window, she was asleep, her hand tucked under her cheek, her face younger than 12 in the gray December light, coming through the hospital blinds. I sat beside her and stayed there. Outside, Knoxville was getting dark. Somewhere across the city, in a CPS office on Middlebrook Pike, lawyers were talking, and documents were being signed, and the machinery of consequence was turning slowly forward. And here in room 314, my daughter was sleeping in a warm bed. I stayed until the dinner trays came. Then I stayed after that. Sophie woke up at 12:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I was still awake, sitting in the recliner with my coat across my lap, like a blanket, watching the numbers on the monitor beside her bed tick steadily through the dark. 98.4. Heart rate 61. Oxygen 99%. Numbers that meant she was fine, that her body had done what bodies do when given warmth and food and rest, repaired itself, returned to baseline, come back from the edge of something I didn't want to think about too directly. The monitor beeped once, a routine check cycle, and Sophie's eyes opened. She lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling. Then she turned her head and found me in the dark. Dad. Her voice was soft and sleep-rough. You're still here. I'm still here, I said. She pushed herself up against her pillows, slowly wincing slightly, when her wrist pressed against the mattress. The bruises were fading. Dr. Wells had said they'd be mostly yellow by the end of the week, which was the body's way of finishing an argument, but they weren't gone yet. Probably wouldn't be fully gone by Christmas morning. Can't sleep, she asked. Not really, I said. You? She shook her head. I keep thinking about stuff. What kind of stuff? She pulled her knees up and wrapped her arms around them and looked at the dark window. Outside, Knoxville was quiet in the way cities go quiet after midnight, not silent, just slower. The ordinary noise of the world turned down to its lowest register. "I keep thinking about September," she said. "When I started recording, I used to lie in bed at night and think, what if I'm doing the wrong thing? What if I misunderstood what they were saying, and I'm making a big thing out of nothing?" She pressed her chin against her knees. "I almost deleted all of it like 4 times. My chest hurt, listening to her. "What stopped you?" She thought about it. "You always say that when something feels wrong enough to keep you up at night, it probably is wrong." She glanced sideways at me. "You said that when I was in 4th grade, and I saw Tommy Briggs cheating on a spelling test. I told the teacher, and you said I did the right thing, even though it was hard." "I remember that," I said. "Tommy Briggs was really mad at me for like 2 weeks." "I remember that too." The ghost of a smile crossed her face. Then it faded, and she looked back at the window. "Dad," she said, "was I brave, really?" Because it didn't feel like being brave. It felt like being scared for a really long time. I leaned forward in the recliner and put my elbows on my knees. "Sophie," I said, "that's exactly what brave is. It's not the absence of fear. It's doing the thing anyway, while the fear is still there sitting right on top of you, making everything harder." I paused. "You were scared for 2 months, and you kept those recordings anyway. You were scared in that garage, and you rationed your crackers, and you saved the batteries in that flashlight until they ran out." My voice cracked on the last part, and I let it. "That's not the absence of brave. That's the whole definition of it." She looked at me for a long moment. Then her face did the thing it had done last night, that sudden total collapse, no warning, and she pressed both hands over her eyes, and her shoulders shook hard twice before she pulled herself back. "I was really scared, Dad," she said, her voice muffled behind her hands. "I was really, really scared." "I know, baby." I moved from the recliner to the edge of her bed, and she dropped her hands and leaned into me, and I put my arms around her and held on. "I know. I've got you. I've got you now." She cried for a few minutes, not the long, exhausted crying of last night, but something shorter and more specific, like a last small pocket of fear finally finding its way out. When she was done, she sat back and accepted the box of hospital tissues I handed her, and blew her nose with considerable force. "Attractive," I said. She laughed a real one short and surprised out of her and wiped her eyes. "Shut up, Dad." "I'm just saying. Shut up." We sat in the quiet for a while. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Down the hall, someone's call button chimed, and a nurse's shoes squeaked past the door. Somewhere outside, a car moved through the wet streets, and its tires made that particular hissing sound that meant the temperature had come up enough to melt the ice, which meant Christmas Eve would be clear. "Dad," Sophie said eventually. "Yeah, when we get the real Christmas tree next year." She picked at a loose thread on the hospital blanket. "Can we get a big one like ceiling height? We always got the medium ones because Mom said the big ones made too much mess." Something warm moved through my chest. "We can get whatever size you want. And can we do the ornaments in a different order? We always did lights first, then ornaments. But I read online that some people do the ornaments first, and then the lights, and it looks really different." "We can do the ornaments first. And the star on top instead of an angel." "Sophie." I looked at her seriously. "You can put a Tennessee Volunteers foam finger on top if you want. It's your tree." She grinned so wide her eyes went to crescents. "I would never do that. That would be tacky." "Very tacky," I agreed. She leaned back against her pillows, the grin fading into something quieter, and more settled the expression of someone who has been very far from home and has just remembered clearly what home feels like. "I'm glad you came back early," she said. The words were simple, and she said them simply without performance, the way children say the truest things. My throat closed completely. I pressed my lips together and breathed through it. "Me too," I managed. "Me too, sweetheart." She closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed within minutes, dropping back into sleep the way the young do, fast and complete, as if sleep is a place they know how to find in the dark. I moved back to the recliner. I pulled my coat across my lap. I watched the numbers on the monitor, 98.6, now better than before, climbing back toward everything it should be. I sat there until the sky outside the window began to change color at the edges. Then a gentle knock came at the door, and Michael stepped in quietly already in his coat, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Merry Christmas Eve," he said softly. "Is it time?" I asked. He nodded. "Judge Marsh is ready." I looked at Sophie, still sleeping, her hand tucked under her cheek, her face younger than 12 in the gray Christmas morning light. I stood up, put on my coat, and kissed her gently on the forehead. She didn't wake. I walked out into the corridor and pulled the door closed behind me soft as I could. Judge Helen Marsh was the kind of woman who had seen everything and been surprised by none of it. 18 years on the family court bench will do that to a person. The emergency hearing on December 24th lasted 40 minutes. Michael laid out the evidence in sequence: the text messages, the security footage, Carol Hutchins' photographs, the medical records, Sophie's recordings, Eric's voluntary statement. Judge Marsh asked 4 questions. When Michael finished, she removed her reading glasses, looked at the documents for a long moment, and signed the order. Full temporary custody to David Carter. No unsupervised contact with Linda or Margaret pending the March hearing. The property trust frozen. A referral to the district attorney for criminal charges. Outside the courthouse, the air was cold and sharp, and the sky was the pale blue of a clear Christmas Eve morning. Michael shook my hand. I drove back to the hospital and told Sophie we were going home. She asked which home. I told her we'd figure it out together. We did. 3 months later, the comprehensive hearing awarded me full physical custody. Linda received supervised visitation contingent on completing a court-mandated counseling program. Margaret faced criminal charges for child neglect. Eric surrendered his real estate license. The house my father left Sophie remained exactly where it had always been, hers untouched. I sold our old house in the spring. Sophie never once asked to go back. We moved to Sequoia Hills. Smaller house front porch, swing a backyard oak tree that Sophie immediately claimed as her personal reading spot. I cut my travel schedule in half. I hired a project manager for Cincinnati. I was home for dinner most nights, and it turned out that was the thing I hadn't known I was missing. The following Christmas Eve, we drove out to a tree farm on Emery Road and walked the rows until Sophie found a Fraser fir ceiling height, smelling exactly like pine is supposed to smell. We strapped it to the truck roof and drove home singing badly to the radio. She did the ornaments before the lights. I admitted it looked better that way. She put the star on top. Then she disappeared into her room and came back with a small box wrapped carefully with tape at precise corners, the way she did everything when she was really trying. Inside was a silver keychain. One word engraved on the face: always. She stood with her hands clasped in front of her, and her chin up, that particular combination of hope and dignity that belongs entirely to almost 13-year-olds presenting something they mean completely. "Because you always come back," she said. "Even when you don't know anything's wrong, you just come back." My eyes burned so hard I had to press my lips together and wait it out. "Always," I said. She walked into my arms and I held her, while the tree lights blinked their slow, multicolored rhythm behind us. and the neighborhood outside was warm and ordinary, and full of the sound of other people living their lives. It was enough. More than enough. People ask me sometimes what those 72 hours taught me. I tell them the truth. I didn't win because I was smarter, or angrier, or more determined than anyone else in that situation. I won because I came home 3 days early, and my daughter had spent 2 months quietly and terrifiedly building the truth into a folder labeled Science Project 3, waiting for someone she trusted to come home and know what to do with it. She gave me everything I needed. I just had to show up in time. People ask me if I feel like I got revenge. Honestly, no. Family Stories' revenge isn't what healed us. What healed us was a 12-year-old girl who never stopped believing her father would come back, and a father who came back 3 days early. I'm not a perfect man. I traveled too much. I trusted too easily. I signed documents I should have read. If your gut is telling you something is wrong inside your own home, don't do what I did. Don't wait. Don't assume. Family drama revenge solves nothing. But truth documented carefully and handled quietly changes everything. I believe God puts the right people in the right places at the right moments. Carol Hutchins stood at that window for 2 days with a phone camera. That wasn't coincidence. My personal opinion. The most dangerous people aren't the ones who hate you openly. They're the ones who smile at you across the dinner table while quietly dismantling everything you built. Family Stories' revenge fantasies are easy. Building a case on patience and evidence, that's the hard road. But it's the only road that actually leads somewhere. If this story moved you, drop a comment below and tell me what hit hardest. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you so much for staying with me all the way to the end. A final note, some upcoming stories contain fictional elements constructed purely for reflection and life lessons. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. Choose what serves you best. But if you're staying, I'll see you in the next one.